Hello, my name is James Wallis, and in 1993 I wrote two Sonic the Hedgehog adventure game books, Sonic the Hedgehog Metal City Mayhem and Sonic the Hedgehog Zone Rangers. How did I come to write these books? It's a good question. The main answer, the simplest answer, is that Dave Morris didn't want to. Dave Morris, if you're listening to this because you're into solo game books, you'll know who Dave Morris is, because he was, and remains, one of the most prolific authors of solo game books, certainly in the 90s and the 2000s. He was, in fact, I think, the best-selling author in the UK in 1990, because he wrote 6 Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles books. Not solo game books, just standalone novels, each of which sold more than 1 million copies. He unfortunately did them for a fixed fee, not royalties. But Dave did an awful lot of this stuff. He did licensed works and he did solo game books. So when Puffin picked up the license to do Sonic the Hedgehog game books, they naturally went to him first, and he was busy. But he recommended me. I knew Dave through a role-playing group that we were in, playing a game called Empire of the Petal Throne. But he also knew that I was an aspiring writer. I had sold some short fiction. I was doing journalism. I was writing for magazines like White Dwarf. I was, in fact, writing role-playing supplements for a company called Palladium at that point. So I'd done a book or two, but not a solo game book. I started writing for games in the early to mid-80s. I did a fanzine back when I was still at school, and I did a couple of solo adventures for that, one of which had 130 paragraphs, which is not huge. That's not book length. But, you know, for something that you're putting together yourself, which you're then going to photocopy for a, you know, cheap little magazine that has maybe 60 or 70 readers, it's still quite a lot of work. Anyway, so I had no part in the licensing. I had no part in acquiring the license. That was all Puffin Fantail. And they came to me and they said, this deal might happen. That was it. They hadn't got the license at that point. They were looking into it. They were still working through the contracts. And so I went, oh, this sounds really exciting. I won't do anything until I get the deal, because this is going to be quite a chunk of work. And nothing happened, and so I took a job. I just finished my journalism postgrad at what was the London College of Printing and Distributive Trades, and is now the London College of Communication at Elephant and Castle, where bizarrely I've done guest lectures recently. I was a university lecturer until recently. Anyway, so I took a job working full-time on a magazine, and almost immediately I started that. Of course, Puffin phone up and go, the deal's through, we've signed the contract, get cracking on the books. So I had to write. This is the other thing. Quite often when you get a deal to write licensed books like this, they will have spent months negotiating the contract, leaving you weeks to write the book. Or books in this case. So I had to do these 2 books. I think each one might have had 2 months. I think it was 2 months per book, basically. I had to deliver the 2. But I was working full time. And this is the early 90s. Laptops barely existed back then. You could get them, but they were expensive and they were heavy and they had rubbish battery life. And I had got one, actually, because that's the kind of guy I was. But it had not occurred to me that I was going to need to use it on the tube commuting, because I live in London, commuting from home to work and work to home. But I had to squeeze every minute I could out of the day, out of my waking day, to write this book, for these books. First of all, mapping them out, not using software to map them out, because there was no flowcharting software at the time that could do it. Doing that all by hand on sheets of graph paper, again, on the tube, in my lunch hour. And of course, the moment I got home in the evening, you know, sitting down, working on that stuff. And then once the flowcharting is done, then writing it all. No approvals on the flowcharts or anything like that. I had submitted outlines. They'd had me submit, I think they were just kind of 1-page outlines describing the plot and how I was going to approach it, a little bit about the game system. I had not played Sonic before this deal came through. In fact, one of the first things when the contract was actually signed that I did was rush out and buy a Mega Drive, which of course I could justify at that point because it's a business expense, so I could write it off against tax. I recommend this as a way of buying games consoles if you ever get the chance. Sonic 2 had not come out at that point because as part of the process, I was invited over to, I can't remember if it was Sega headquarters or Sega's PR company's headquarters. It was not the huge building in West London. It was in West London, but it was a much smaller building. And I got to play a little bit of Sonic 2, which was running off basically a prototype cartridge. And you could literally, it was, you know, this was not a smooth molded plastic thing. This was a breadboarded circuitry. The chips were visible. My goodness, I wish I'd stolen it. No, I don't, but I wish I had it. It would be so incredibly cool. But so I got to see Sonic 2 running pre-release. We also received from Sega the existing background of the character and what was going on. There really wasn't very much of it. It was, as I recall, about 16 sheets of A4 paper, photocopied black and white, with the backstory of Sonic and where he came from, the story of Ivo Kintobor and how he became the evil Dr. Robotnik. You'll have to forgive me, I'm a bit rusty because I haven't done much with Sonic for a long time. This, I believe the background was subsequently rewritten, and therefore the novels and the game books, I'll come on to the novels in a minute, the novels and game books are not full canon. But other than that, we were just kind of let rip. It gave the name of the the other animal characters, who at the time, if you remember Sonic 1 and 2, just tiny little animated sprites. They appear at the end of levels. They play no part, they have no speaking role, they're not given a name. But that stuff was in the series Bible, the world Bible that I was sent. And I just kind of, played through the game, because at the time at home I could only play Sonic 1, Sonic 2 not being out yet. But I knew about the character of Tails, and I knew about the interactions there. And I knew about their characters and personalities, but an awful lot I just kind of extrapolated and made up, frankly. And I don't think either Puffin or Sega had any objections to what I was writing. It all kind of made sense. Anyway, but from that, I'd played a lot of video games before that. I fell in love with video games in the early 80s. Played a lot of arcade games, rather badly. Played a lot of home computer games. Hadn't really played many platform games. Had played Manic Miner, the early platform games in the early mid-80s. But as a genre, it had kind of disappeared. And unless you had a NES and you were playing Mario games, there just weren't that many platform games around. Sonic comes along, and it just in terms of the gameplay, the smoothness, the animation, it's just this joyous revelation, this explosion of colour and dynamic gameplay. Fell in love with the character at that point and wanted to do right by him within the books, and to as much as possible translate the feel of the video games into the game books. So, as I say, I hit my deadline, 2 books in 4 months. So that's about a month of flowcharting. If you break the books down, if you look at them, they are kind of almost divided into, not precisely chapters, but segments. And each segment has about 30 paragraphs within it. And if you know about the structure of flowcharting, a solo game book like this, what you do is you'll kind of do a large nest of stuff, and then all the paths slowly converge to one thing that you call a pinch point or a bottleneck. And every player, regardless of how they've got through that chapter, every player will have to pass through that single bottleneck. That'll be one paragraph. And then it all explodes again. You get loads of choices and mad options and stuff like that. And then it pinches again. So I think there's 25 or 30 of those. And each one of those took me about a day to structure. These are handwriting them, rewriting them in many cases, and then writing it all up, while being editorial assistant on Museum's Journal, which is probably the job least like writing Sonic the Hedgehog game books that I could possibly think of. Anyway, which came first, the novels or the game books? Well, the game books came first. Finished the game books, finished my contract at Museums Journal, went off, was doing some other stuff. At which point, I was contacted by an old friend of mine, Mark Gascoigne, who had been, I forget the exact timescale, I think he had been running or was about to be running the Fighting Fantasy line at Puffin. But he had been contacted by Virgin Publishing, where an old colleague of his, and in fact somebody who'd commissioned some of my work, Peter Darvill-Evans, was running the show. Virgin was an interesting outfit. They had the Doctor Who. I mean, it's Virgin Publishing. They were very attached to the record labels, and they did lots and lots of big, glossy books full of photographs of rock stars. But they also had a fiction line, which was they had the Doctor Who license. And they were keeping the flame alive because, of course, at that time, the BBC was not making Doctor Who in the 90s. And the New Adventures of Doctor Who, this Doctor Who line that Virgin was doing, was keeping the spirit alive. And one of the things Peter was really good at was taking existing canon, existing material, and just spinning it out into fiction. And Virgin had got the Sonic license. And in fact, they were negotiating with Sega to license a whole bunch of video games, which subsequently didn't happen as novels, but I wrote pitches for an Echo the Dolphin novel, which I think would have been great, and for a bunch more Sonic novels, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Mark contacted me and said, you did the game books, do you want to do some novels? And I went, well, actually the contract I have with Puffin says, this is ancient history, I can talk about this stuff now. The contract I have with Puffin says that I shouldn't, says in fact that I can't. And he went, it's all right, we'll do them under a pseudonym. And I said, hang on, who's this we? Is this all of us? Mark had also recruited a chap called Carl Sargent, sadly died a couple of years ago. Carl is one of the most, I talked about Dave Morris being prolific. Carl could write a trilogy of fantasy novels in a month. I have never met a man who writes as fast as he did, second only to Michael Moorcock. Michael Moorcock, who legendarily could churn out, and did churn out, some of the Hawkmoon novels that he did in a long weekend. Carl wasn't quite that fast, and let's be honest, not quite that good, but when he was on form, he was brilliant. And, you know, extraordinary, larger-than-life character too. So the deal was struck. Carl would write 2 of the books, I would write 2 of the books, and Mark would edit them for consistency and to put more jokes in. And we would do this all under the group pseudonym of Martin Adams. We had never met anyone called Martin Adams. If you're called Martin Adams, I apologise. We've probably messed up your Google searches for life. No particular reason for choosing the name. Oh, no, there was, vaguely. Martin Amis, the novelist, had an interest in video games, and we originally wondered if we could do a pseudonym that people might think was Martin Amis, but wasn't. So we thought for a while about being Martin Ames, A-M-E-S instead of A-M-I-S, and then we realised that we'd probably get sued. But the advantage of doing a name that starts with an A is you get right at the top of the publishers' lists, so you're the first books that people come to. So we stuck with the A thing. We went with Martin Adams, possibly a bit of an homage to Douglas Adams as well, who, you know, if you'd grown up in the 1980s, Douglas Adams, as far as he was concerned, was the funniest writer possibly of all time. I've reread The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series recently, and mostly they stand up pretty well. There's still some very, very good jokes in there, and a lot of the topical stuff still feels topical. The 5th book is a curio. I hadn't read that one before. Anyway, I'm getting completely off the subject. So, once again, we wait several months for Virgin to finally put the final ink and wait for it to dry on the contract, at which point they turn around and they go, okay, we're going to need these 4 books in 4 months. No, is that right? 3 months, I think. So I wasn't working a day job at this point. I was being a full-time writer. So Carl and I were just, you know, nose to the grindstone on this stuff. I think each book took about 3 weeks to write, possibly One of them the first one slightly longer, the second one because it's up to speed at that point and back in the groove. And of course, the Sonic games are coming out much more regularly now. Sonic 2 was definitely out. I think the next one had come out as well, or was just about to, and there were preview shots. Anyway, and once again, working from exactly the same source material, plus the stuff that we've been able to glean from the games, which was mostly kind of the names of levels and stuff like that, and a couple of incidental characters. And we just busted through them. And when you're working that fast, when you're working with that many constraints and stuff, it almost spurs your creativity rather than limiting it. And we were just inventing crazy stuff. It was really fun. So I wrote Sonic in the Fourth Dimension, first of all, which is just basically an excuse to do every time travel shtick and plot twist and thing that I think I've ever come across and stick them all in one novel. And it's a hoot. I'm still really pleased with some of the writing in that. There's hat tips to friends. Things are named after people I know. There's little bits quoted from the records, the music I was listening to at the time. It's a romp. And then Sonic and the Silicon Warriors was the second one, which was also, I mean, that's just an homage, a love letter to video games generally. So it's a video game novel about other video games. And that was a delight to do. It was really, really fun. Why did I stop writing after the first two game books? Because that was all I was contracted to do. They contracted me to do two, and I think they wanted to see if they were going to sell. And they did. And as I recall, they did come back to me and said, do you want to do some more? By which point I was doing something else and simply didn't have the time. And so the jobs went to someone else. Can't remember who did 3 and 4, but the later ones were, I believe, Mark Gascoigne and Jonathan Green, who is one of the great torch wavers for the modern gamebook movement. And you know, I've known Mark and Jonathan and most of the people. It is a very small world. I've known them since the early 90s. It would have been fun to do some more, but as I say, I didn't have the time, and to be honest, the money was not great. They were fun to do. I'll take on a poorly paying project if I think it's going to be really fun, but you can't sustain on that. You can't do that indefinitely. You know, at some point, you have to put some money aside for the big bills that are going to come up. But absolutely no regrets. And, you know, I get requests like this, but I do occasionally get fan mail from people going, you wrote these books, or did you write these books because they were influential, you know, or just enjoyable. I didn't set out to change anyone's lives. They weren't trying to be philosophical or anything. We're trying to be a fun read. I don't know how they sold. I do know, I believe Virgin sold the entire print run to a book club. The trouble with doing that is we were supposed to get royalties on those, which is unusual for a licensed deal. But when a publisher sells a book to a book club, you get fractions of a penny on each copy. And we made almost no additional money on it. Would I go back? Would I do another one if it was offered to me? I can't. I've spent most of my career in and out of. I've done a bunch of stuff. I was in newspapers and magazines in the 90s. I was briefly a television presenter. I say briefly, for a couple of years. At the end of the decade, I've done websites. I've done movies, movie publicity. I got to write some dialogue for Anthony Daniels as C-3PO for a documentary that he voiced over, which was fantastic, career goal there. And then I was a university lecturer. I've written 17 books, so another 13 books of different types. And these days I'm working full-time for Asmodee, the second largest board game publisher in the world, which is an enormous privilege and huge fun. But as anyone who's signed a contract with a major corporation like that knows, there are usually non-competes in the contract, and indeed there are with mine, and I can't do work for anyone else while I'm working for Asmodee without getting special permission from the high-ups. So I could conceivably, if I was offered the Sonic books, to do additional Sonic books, I could go and ask permission. The trouble is, I've not played a Sonic game since Sonic Adventure 2. I tell a lie. I've played Sonic and Sonic All-Stars Racing, which I think is the title of it, which is sort of a Sonic game, but not really. I don't think Sonic made the transition well to 3D. I think the 2D games... I've played Sonic Mania. I've played a bunch of the later 2D games as well, but they don't have an awful lot of story to them. I think Sonic kind of lost his way plot-wise, and certainly I lost touch with Sonic. I don't know the background. I don't know the continuity. It would be an awful lot of work for me to go back and pick up all of that stuff, even though one could argue that way back in the day, in the dawn of time, I established some of that in the game books and in the novels. It has evolved over 25 years to a state where I would have to do an awful lot of research and play an awful lot of video games just to work out exactly who everyone is and how it all fits together and what's canon and what isn't canon. This is the trouble, you know. I was lucky enough to be in at the start of Sonic. At one point, I'm pretty sure I had written more Sonic fiction, essentially, interactive and novels, than anyone else in the world. Just for a brief, shiny few weeks. And that's a huge privilege. But to go back to it now and to have to work with all of that pre-existing material would be an awful lot of work to get up to speed. And I've done that before. I've worked with Games Workshop. I've written a couple of Warhammer novels. But that was partly because I'd been publishing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay for 5 years before that. So it was a world I knew inside out. I'm afraid I don't know the Sonic world inside out. Still love the characters, still love that vibe, still love the sense of immediacy and cool and the beautiful, beautiful world and just the startup sounds from the Mega Drive, from Sonic 1 and Sonic 2. And I still regard Sonic 2 as one of the finest video games ever created. But it would be an awful lot of work to go back and write more game books. That said, the methodologies for creating game books have changed so much. I'm not going to say easier to create them these days, but certainly the software tools for creating the flowcharts, using stuff like Twine, if you're familiar with Twine, the interactive fiction engine, or one of many interactive fiction engines, it would be an awful lot easier to do. And writing that kind of stuff is great. It's really fun. If you've never tried it, do just give it a go. It's a very, very different discipline of writing from writing straight fiction, and it's enormously liberating and enormously fun. Thanks so much for listening. I'm James Wallis.